Welcome to another episode of Jay and Leno's Book Club. Remember, no weight loss, no self-help, just stuff that rolls, explodes, and makes noise. And we have, I think, one of the greatest books. If this doesn't get Book of the Year, I will be very upset. This is Richard Harman. He is the author of Cunningham, The Passion, The Cars, The Legacy. You know, the English are a nation of scribes. You start with Shakespeare, and you come right up to Richard. I mean, if you want a biography of an automobile company, go to England. They really do the research. You've really done your homework. How long did it take you to write this?
Just over 9 years now since I first mooted the idea.
Right, and it's really a labor of love, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you don't get rich making these books.
No, far from it.
I mean, that's what I think is wonderful. You know, like these guys that restore cars and put hundreds of thousands of hours into them. It comes out to about 10 cents an hour by the time you're done. And I imagine it's something like that too, because it's such an amazing book. Well, first of all, let's tell people who Briggs Cunningham was, for those who don't know.
Well, Briggs was, must be said, a multi-millionaire to start with a passion for both sailing and for cars in general.
He was heir to the Swift meatpacking company here in America.
That's right.
I don't know if they'd know that name in England, but here in America, just huge. Yeah. And that was back when millions of dollars was really hundreds of millions of dollars, wasn't it?
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. And he was the man that also won the America's Cup a number of times, didn't
Yes, 58 he won it in.
Yeah.
He was called in at the last minute to captain the boat because the original captain was ailing.
Now, at first glance, you might dismiss him as a playboy or something of that nature.
Well, yeah.
But he really wasn't. He was well-educated. He was a true sportsman. He won the America's Cup, raced at Le Mans.
Yeah.
I mean, and started his own Cunningham car company. Let's show people this book. It is just unbelievable. There are 2 volumes, and I mean, beautifully. You know, in this age when everything is on the internet, it's so nice to have something you can really hold in your hand, and the texture and the quality of the paper and the photographs is just unbelievable. Yeah. I've only had the book for a few days, so I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing yet, but the photography, just amazing. I imagine there are a lot of pictures here that no one's ever seen before.
Well, yes, I was fortunate, having met Briggs' son and his dear wife. They invited me to stay with them for a week at the beginning of this year in January.
Okay.
And they had inherited, or rather they had purchased, a whole chunk of Briggs' archives, which included photographs, newspapers, magazines, books, and they hadn't really had time to sort them out because they're busy running their ranch, their cattle ranch. And they looked upon that. They thought, well, he's a man. It took a bit of persuading as to what an Englishman was doing writing about Briggs' father. But they said, yes, come along, you can come any time. I said, well, I'll come as soon as I can, because we were getting a little tight for the schedule for the book. And I ended up with a huge amount of additional information.
Right.
Photos, personal photos that had been taken not just at the race meetings at Le Mans, taken by the team or the family that were there with him, which, if I say they were amateur photos, they were more personal photos.
Sure.
And they showed, you know, the atmosphere of Le Mans, which was tremendous in those early 50s days.
Did you ever meet Briggs?
Nope.
Okay.
My biggest regret is that in 1979 my wife and I holidayed in California, but I was blindly unaware that about 20 miles down the road Briggs had his museum.
Right.
And I didn't discover that until much later, until I started writing the book. I thought, my goodness.
What was the most fascinating thing, or what was the thing you learned in researching it that you didn't know before? Was there any?
Ooh, quite a lot. I realised after I'd begun setting off on this journey that I thought I knew a lot, but it was just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And the more people I spoke to, and without exception, everybody I did contact said, oh, good, somebody is going to tell us the full story now.
Right.
There's been a few books in the past, but they have really only scratched the surface or been about one specific race or one specific car. But I thought, well, surely such a great American as this deserves a total record.
Yeah, and he collected cars back in the days where if you collected old cars, you were a car nut. It was just like, like my dad used to say, why would you buy an old car when you got a brand new Cadillac? Why would you buy something you have to shift by hand? My dad just never understood why anybody would spend a fortune for an old car. But he was driving, in fact, I have a Crane Simplex next door. He had a Crane Simplex as well. You know, he collected them when they weren't worth anything.
Right, and he also bought perhaps what you would call more mundane cars as well.
Right.
He bought the cars that he liked, and he liked to drive them.
I just saw one of my favorites here. This is a car that, while you would think you could go racing with this, Le Monster, isn't that the Cadillac there? He was racing, what, a 53 Cadillac?
No, it's 51
Oh, 51
Cadillac.
Caddy,
That was
okay.
261 Cadillacs.
Yeah.
One, the standard coupe,
Right.
which was basically out of the showroom, although
Right.
it was strengthened for racing,
Right.
and they had the high performance engine. The second one was identical mechanically, but they put an aluminium, handcrafted aluminium roadster bodywork,
Right, right.
which the French christened Le Monstre,
Yeah.
the monster,
Right.
which is probably as good a description of it
Yeah,
as
yeah. And he raced Corvette, didn't he?
in 1960.
Yeah.
We finally got Corvettes to race at Le Mans
Yeah.
with the help of Arkus Duntov.
Three of them, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
3. And we've recently found the missing third car.
That's right, yeah, because a friend of mine has one of them, Bruce Meyer. He has
Yes.
one of the Corvettes. And yeah, there's some sort of intrigue going on with the missing car. I'm not sure
The
what it
one
is
that's
right
missing
now.
has been found, but there's a bit of an argument as to the provenance, not the provenance of it, that's genuine, but the
Yeah.
ownership of it.
And you
which,
see, he raced with the American racing colors of the day, which was white with blue stripes.
yeah, I believe he was the first to do that.
I always like people who race for their country. I always like Sterling Moss because he always tried to race English when
Yes,
he could.
absolutely.
You know, and Briggs raced American vehicles. He was wealthy enough to race Ferraris or anything like that if he
Oh
wanted
yes,
to.
he had his pick of the other racing cars,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
his
but-
dream was always to win Le Mans with an American
With an
car.
American car. And he didn't quite, came
No.
close.
No, he put us a very good performance, considering the opposition he was up against.
So volume 1 is the early years and most of the early
years
cars.
and the chapter specifically about the Cunningham built cars.
Right.
Then there are 2 further chapters, the other racing cars, which are all the other racing cars that he raced from other manufacturers, including
Right.
the early Ferrari, and including the early cars he had in his museum, which are classed as racing cars, such as the Mercer.
Right.
And he never raced the Mercer, but Mercers
Right.
were raced. And then finally the other road cars which he owned.
You know, the fun thing for me is to look at the pictures and just see racetracks I've heard about and read about. And there's no, as I said before, there's no advertising. It's just a grandstands and people sit, you watch the race, and people tape the headlights and put tape on the doors for numbers, and you went racing. It was really
That's
a
right,
purer,
Yes.
yeah, more innocent time, I guess you could say. And you also cover some of his boats in here as well?
I cover, there's a small section in the history of the
Yeah.
America's Cup in '58 and the
Yeah.
story behind that, but I'm not a yachting man or a boating
No,
fan.
I'm not the other guy either, but it's just all the drivers, Dan Gurney, everybody's in here.
Yes, it ends up with a chapter about all the drivers who drove for Cunningham through the years.
Where can they get the book?
Direct from DaltonWatson.com.
Go to Dalton, and how much is the book?
The standard book, which you have there,
Right.
is $350,
Okay, very
which
good.
to me sounded an awful lot of money. But
It is a lot of
but
money.
Glenn Morris said, look, we don't really I want to break even. If we break even on this book, he'll be happy. It was a very expensive book to produce. It's got, as you said, all the top quality materials. Images are top quality and have had expert treatment to get some of the older photographs
yeah.
in a more presentable form.
Yeah, it really is a book that will just grace, if you have an automotive library, and this is the definitive American sportsman. You know, I put Briggs right up there with Phil Hill and Dan Gurney and all of those guys. And if you're not familiar with him, it's a good read. If you like Phil and Dan Gurney and Parnelli Jones, he fits right in there. He came a little bit before those guys. He's a little bit older than those guys. But if you enjoy reading about them, this is the backstory, because Phil was good friends with him as well.
Absolutely.
What's your next book?
My next book is going on holiday with my wife,
Oh, there you go.
who's long suffering over these past 8 years.
Well,
I don't know as there will ever be another book. That's the
Well-
one I wanted to do, the one I always wanted to do.
okay, well, it's a man's life work right here. I know it's an expensive book, but it's a gift for someone who enjoys automobiles. It doesn't get any better than this. If you like Rolls Royces and Bentleys and Duesenbergs, this book is in that category. It's just beautifully put together, nicely laid out. I mean, I was in it for hours and I was up to like here, you know, because I realized this is a book, turn off the TV, go in your den or wherever you sit with your automobiles and just enjoy this. And it's a great story about a great guy. You know, so many heroes you read about, you get horribly disappointed because they're drunks or they're cheaters or they're something. Whereas Briggs was a class act all the way.
I think so, yes. And everybody remembers him as that, I think.
Richard, thank you.
Pleasure. My
Thank you.
pleasure.
Mm-hmm.